From chipmunks to coyotes, from blue jays to turkeys, many different forms of wildlife make their home in the cities and towns of Georgia. Coming up next on Georgia Outdoors. From the perches of a backyard bird feeder to the bar stools of the local watering hole, Georgia's cities and suburbs are home to many forms of urban wildlife. Perhaps the most abundant class of animal found in our cities is birds. In one leafy Atlanta neighborhood, there can be seen dozens of feathered friends. Resident John Roser describes a typical block party.
We have little Carolina wrens, we have the old blue jays, we have the Georgia state bird, the brown thrasher, and I'm not too fond of them. They eat our figs. Within the last several years, we've acquired some new residents on our street. My wife and I have lived here 45 years, but we'd never expected to have wild turkeys show up. But here they are.
There's a whole turkey lore in the neighborhood, you know. They've been here for 20 years, or they just came 10 years ago, but they've been here as long as I've lived here.
A neighbor kept them in a small farm.
Right up by the railroad track, 2 or 3 blocks from us.
I heard they got away, and he tried to gather them up, but didn't get all of them.
We don't know that, but that's where we think they came from.
When they first came out, there were crowds of them, like a dozen in people's yards, just up and down the street.
At the turn of the century, turkeys were having a hard time. Suitable land was disappearing. Capture and relocation programs have brought this bird back from the brink. And while habitat loss is still significant, the birds are obviously adapting to changing times.
As long as there's not too many dogs or kids with slingshots and BB guns chasing them, they may continue to do all right.
We are very concerned about their safety.
We have a lot of jokes in our neighborhood about, what are you serving for Thanksgiving dinner?
Turkeys are the largest game bird in North America. They have between 5,000 and 6,000 feathers, which keep them warm and dry, allow them to fly, and to show off for the opposite sex. There are 2 major characteristics which distinguish males from females: spurs and beards.
The factor that's the most consistently distinguishable to tell hens from gobblers is the head. The gobbler has a very bulbous head. In the spring, when he's fired up for mating, it'll be red, white, and blue. So he's truly an American bird.
So American, in fact, that Benjamin Franklin proposed the turkey as the national symbol of the fledgling United States. He was dismayed when the bald eagle was chosen, saying the turkey is a much more respectable bird, and withal a true original native of America.
It's amazing that they have survived, because this is a very busy, there's speed bumps on the road, a very busy city neighborhood, and you will even see them walking along the main road there, just bustling along with many lanes of traffic. It's extraordinary.
Some other critters that are famous for their urban know-how are squirrels. Well, maybe not this one, but gray squirrels epitomize urban wildlife, and they're probably the most frequently seen wild mammals in Georgia. In fact, life is so good in the city that there are more squirrels here than in the forest. You can see them scampering just about everywhere, on fences, in trees, on bird feeders, and perhaps most frequently in public parks, where scraps and handouts are numerous. Dogs are also everyday park visitors and are usually welcome. They are man's best friend, after all. But another member of the dog family is not so welcome and is probably a more frequent visitor to urban and suburban areas than anyone might think: the coyote.
People think because they might live in a suburban area that they're not supposed to be here. The fact is, coyotes are virtually statewide, and there's a healthy population of them, and they're here to stay.
Coyotes can and will live virtually anywhere. They thrive in suburban areas, dining on garbage and rodents, such as moles and chipmunks.
And a lot of times, especially in subdivisions, gutter downspouts are attached to a black plastic pipe that runs underground and drains somewhere else. That's a good place for rodents to hide. And coyotes are keen hearing and can hear those little rodents running in those pipes, and it's not uncommon for them to dig them up. The simple solution to that is put a piece of wire over the end of it. You won't have a coyote digging up your yard, or the neighbor's dog for that matter.
Coyotes appear more threatening than they actually are. Their long legs and bushy tail can be menacing, but in reality, coyotes weigh a mere 25 to 35 pounds, and they're probably more afraid of you than you are of them, although your cat may want to proceed with some legitimate trepidation. Because coyotes can and do target household pets as prey, they are considered a nuisance or pest species, but few species are as reviled as the beaver.
Beavers in urban environments are always seen as nuisance wildlife when this actually is not the case. Beavers damming is actually extremely beneficial because the flooding causes wetlands to occur, and honestly over half the endangered species in the world spend at least some part of their life in a wetland environment. And this is also good for purification of river streams going through wetland environments, and they don't realize the actual benefit of having beaver around.
No other animal affects their environment as much as the beaver, except of course for humans. Building is in a beaver's blood, and they do it constantly during their waking hours, which is to say mostly at night, although they can be active during the day depending on the weather. These beavers live along the Chattahoochee River in Roswell. Their lodge is typical, as it's a round structure made of branches and mud. When danger threatens, a beaver will slap the surface of the water with its tail, producing a loud sound that serves to warn other beavers. The ponds that back up behind a beaver dam is really good habitat for many different species of wildlife, including fish, turtles, egrets, and geese.
Canada geese are a migratory species. Most of the geese we have problems with in Georgia are resident geese. Canada goose population had declined to the point of needing some help back 30 years ago. And so our agency embarked on a Canada goose restocking program, and it worked. And we have plenty of geese.
Canada geese are one of the most commonly seen animals in the suburbs. These geese live just upstream from the beaver lodge on the Chattahoochee River. They come here because they know where to get food.
And the old saying, one man's trash is another man's treasure, is true with geese. Most of our parks along the lakes or access points along the river, anywhere that geese and people come into contact on any scale, that's where we end up with the most critical goose complaints. And a lot of that is caused by people feeding them, making pets out of them, if you will. But the person that's trying to picnic and doesn't want to be mugged by a goose or doesn't want to step in goose mess, that's a problem for them.
When it comes to finding a free meal, raccoons are some of the best foragers around. These bandits are equally at home in forested, rural, and suburban areas. While most feeding of raccoons is unintentional, that is not the case when it comes to birds. Humans spend more than $170 million a year on bird feed.
A lot of kind of birds can be seen in these urban and suburban areas. In fact, people who put out feeders often get just about as good a variety as you'll find anywhere, particularly during migration. Atlanta has a lot of trees in it. It's a good example of a city that does pretty well for attracting birds. But a lot of resident birds are in the cities too, and I often hear of barred owls, screech owls, pileated woodpeckers. Some of these others are nesting right in people's yards. They put up boxes for them. Of course, robins do quite well, bluebirds, crows even are moving in some of these areas. So people with a little bit of diverse habitat in some of these suburban areas can do pretty well attracting quite a few birds. Even a small yard can do a lot for attracting wildlife. You've got a good variety of native vegetation planted, in particular, some shrubs and some over canopy of trees. Provides a lot of food, shelter, and nesting spaces. And that can attract a lot of birds and other wildlife. Some of them don't need a very large territory, so just a few yards together in a subdivision might be enough to attract a pretty good population of some of these birds.
Mockingbirds can be seen in almost every suburban neighborhood and on every city block. While they're not very picky about their nesting location, they are aggressive about defending those nests. They've been known to chase away crows and hawks and even dive bomb dogs.
I think if you provide a backyard habitat for birds and butterflies and other wildlife, not only are you doing a service to the wildlife, but you are increasing your enjoyment of the natural world 100-fold. So not only are you doing it for a good reason, but you're doing it because it makes you have fun too. So I would say don't do it just for you or just for the birds, but for both, because it's sort of a great thing to do.
Of course, if the perfect backyard habitat is not to be had, some birds will seek out alternatives, like these house sparrows.
I've tried many things to try and to rid the sparrows of the patio. I even bought an owl at the Ace Hardware that somebody said, oh, if you get an owl and put it up, the birds will be scared of the owl. Well, that lasted about a couple days. I even tried moving the owl around a couple different places so they think it was real. So that didn't work.
House sparrows are notoriously ingenious nesters. They are the most abundant songbirds in America and the most widely distributed bird in the world. But this persistence has increased competition for nesting sites, causing the decline of some native bird species, such as the bluebird.
House sparrows seem to be very well adapted to living in cities. In fact, seem to prefer that kind of a situation. They can find plenty of food to eat. A lot of it's just food scraps that people have left around. And they like nesting in structures. You've got plenty of buildings and bridges and things around for them nesting. So yeah, they do quite well. And probably the predation rate is a little bit less in these cities. Again, you might have an occasional hawk passing through some of these areas, or stray cats might be a problem in some areas. But for the most part, these birds are taking advantage of a situation and doing quite well.
It's a marvel how bird species can adapt to urban environments. The European starling was introduced when 100 birds were released in New York City's Central Park. Starlings can now be found throughout the United States. This starling pair has found a unique nesting site, a dramatic example of just how adaptive these birds can be. But the prince of the urban bird kingdom, or some may say the jester, is the rock dove.
A lot of people don't realize that pigeons and doves are essentially the same.
Jim Armstrong is an associate professor of wildlife biology at Auburn University, and he's a pigeon fancier.
A fancier is someone that breeds pigeons primarily for show. My dad also raises pigeons, so Sarah's the third generation. Now a lot of people still think it's crazy, but I've given up on trying to justify it. I don't know, it's almost like there may be a genetic tendency in people. You either have it or you don't.
Jim also deals with nuisance animals, and sometimes he gets calls about his favorite bird, the pigeon. But the pigeons that you see downtown are different from the pigeons Jim keeps.
The one that most people associate with downtown in large cities is the feral pigeon, sometimes called the rock dove. They're the ones that unfortunately create problems for people, because the pigeon is a fairly large bird by wild bird standards, and they are gregarious in nature. So when you put 400 or 500 feral pigeons roosting together, it causes a problem. If pigeons were solitary, their image would probably be a lot better.
All pigeons, both the feral urban pigeons and the cultivated pigeons, are monogamous and lay 2 eggs. Pigeons feed their young in a unique manner. They secrete a substance known as pigeon milk. Jim finds working in the pigeon loft amongst the cooing to be a peaceful part of the day.
It's probably some of the most relaxing time. I've always wondered if measure people's blood pressure. I bet pigeon breeders' blood pressure is the lowest when they're in the loft. Even when cleaning the loft or doing things, it may not be all that much fun. It's just a very relaxing time.
With the large numbers of pigeons living in our urban cities, one wouldn't suspect that there was a rapacious predator soaring above. And for many years, there wasn't.
Their natural place to nest is on cliffs, and what better nesting habitat than the skyscrapers in downtown Atlanta.
These skyscrapers, to a falcon, look just like a rock cliff. They find nice suitable ledges where they can place their nest, and there's plenty of pigeons and other birds in these cities. And so peregrine falcons do quite well.
Peregrines are the fastest animal species on the planet. They can reach speeds of over 200 miles per hour. The decline of the peregrine falcon is attributed to the use of pesticides such as DDT. Thanks to the banning of DDT in 1972 and the efforts of biologists, these birds of prey have been given a second chance.
Peregrines that live in cities, they're hunting right there in the city areas and in some of the parks. And we get reports from all around town, people see them out their office window, swooping down to chase a bird, or maybe chasing through the park, Piedmont parks in these areas. So they're covering a lot of ground, and peregrine catches all their food in the air, so they're really not needing perches and that kind of thing. And they use the buildings for their feeding posts and for lookouts and all.
Another species that is back from the brink of extinction, but that is now showing up in our cities, is the American alligator. In the 1960s, alligator population was very low. Hunting was prohibited, and their population has rebounded. Rebounded so much, in fact, that a limited harvest is again allowable.
Alligators, like most other wildlife species, they'll disperse and move and establish new home ranges as young ones grow up, and maybe the population gets too heavy where they are. So it's not uncommon for alligators to end up in swimming pools or a pond in a subdivision or a golf course, and most of the times that's not really a problem. But when people see it as a novelty and throw food scraps out to it, that's not good. It creates potential problems on down the road when an animal gets used to people as a source of food and loses its fear of people. It may or may not be dangerous. In case of alligators, they can be dangerous. Also important not to throw foreign objects at them. It may be fun to watch, but an alligator that's used to getting fed will snap at anything you throw at them. Garbage bags or plastic objects or tennis ball, and anything along those lines can cause some serious health problems for an animal. If they swallow it or it gets caught in their throat, they could choke. And that's true with all wildlife. A lot of problems we have with wildlife are food related, and a lot of times that food is garbage.
Perhaps the most imposing animal that might find your garbage can attractive is the black bear. This bear was spotted in a North Atlanta subdivision.
Probably it was wandering through and smelled a grill or garbage can or pet food or something along those lines, and then when it was confronted or heard noises of people, and the sun came up and the world came alive with activity, it ran up the nearest tree. And so that's where we found it.
If a bear is left alone in a situation like this, they will usually make their way back to the wild. But in this chaotic atmosphere, the chances of the bear coming down on his own was very slim. So the Department of Natural Resources tranquilized him, took biological data, fixed an ear tag, and relocated the bear to a more remote region of Georgia.
Waking up with a hangover and a sore mouth and ear tags, it kind of makes them want to fight shy of people.
This bear is unlikely to come back to the suburb, but another bear could come right behind him and claim the territory.
In spring, especially young male bears, they're dispersing. It's just part of their biology to disperse and cover a lot of ground and look for a home range to set up for yourself where you're not getting beat up every day. And so it's pretty typical for bears to end up in some of these mountain communities and even North Atlanta. And usually if we can leave them alone or get people to leave them alone enough, they'll bounce around for a few days and then make their way back where it's comfortable for them. Their existence is pretty much solitary, except for during the middle of the summer when they're breeding and or a sow with cubs. But they're pretty much solitary creatures, and they're shy, and they're not very aggressive. They're the least aggressive species of bear we have in North America. But they do deserve respect because they are big and strong, so you shouldn't try to pet a bear if it appears tame or anything like that.
If you see a bear, it's best to simply consider yourself lucky and to leave the bear alone. The cityscape is an unsafe place for the bears. They're much better off in the wild. Some animals, on the other hand, have found it beneficial to live in the city. These least terns nest in the gravel atop supermarkets in Savannah. The terns would normally nest on beaches, but erosion and development have reduced much of their ideal habitat. On the upside, there are probably fewer disturbances here.
There's a lot of pressure on wildlife from human development, as we all know, but many species of wildlife are very adaptable. Deer, for example, thrive in subdivisions and golf communities. Plenty for them to eat. It's just a matter of their habitat requirements. And sometimes it's surprising to see how they adapt. And we need to be adaptable as well. When we come into contact with wildlife, a lot of folks view that as a problem, but most of the time, we can modify our behavior or our houses a little bit and mitigate the downside and enjoy living among wildlife. I think it adds to our quality of life.
Owls and bats are both species that make use of human structures. These barn owls are year-long residents of Georgia and can be found across the state. They're nocturnal animals, hunting mostly rodents and other birds between dawn and dusk. Another creature belonging to the night is the big-eared bat, one of the least understood bats in the southeast. What we do understand is that they roost in buildings, old mine shafts, caves, and hollows, and they're only active in complete darkness.
What a lot of people are doing who realize that bats are important but may not want them in their house is actually to construct a bat box. And this is a structure that has some narrow crevices that allows the bats to roost in. It's not always as successful as a bird box, but if enough people keep using them, we feel like we'll get more and more bats using them, the bat boxes, and maybe fewer in buildings where they can cause problems.
When viewing wildlife in the city, nesting locations can be a good place to stake them out, as long as you keep a good distance and don't disturb the animals. A red-bellied woodpecker nesting cavity is a common occurrence in the city and an ideal spot to sit and watch wildlife behavior. The male red-bellied woodpecker can excavate a nest in a dead tree, telephone pole, or fence post in just 7 to 10 days.
People are interested in wildlife. Wildlife adds to our quality of life, and the wildlife shows that are on television are popular, and people like wildlife, but you don't have to take your kids to the zoo to see wildlife. Just take a moment and listen. You'll see birds and hear birds and maybe see a chipmunk running through the flower bed. So wildlife is all around us, and we ought to take the time to enjoy it and let our kids learn a little bit about wildlife. It's always funny to me when my kids come home from school, they've learned about elephants and tigers and lions and things like that. But we've got wildlife all around us, and the species that live in Georgia are as unique and interesting as anywhere in the world. And we ought to count ourselves lucky.
Viewing wildlife can be an exhilarating experience, and wildlife is just about everywhere. Your backyard is a good place to start, but there are also places within our cities that have been set aside as a preserve just for wildlife.
We are at South Peachtree Creek Nature Preserve, which is a very unusual urban nature preserve that was saved from development a number of years ago. It includes a wetland area and a beaver pond and a pine forest and an oak hickory forest. And it's very unusual because you can walk along the boardwalk and see all these changes in habitat and enjoy nature.
Right there, two of them.
It's a beautiful place to come watch birds.
Oh, I've got the baby. To the left of me.
And it's a wonderful place just to get some quiet at the end of the day.
I really believe that areas like this need to be protected. Green space in general needs to be protected so that people don't have to drive 2 hours to find some forest to walk through and relax in. It's so important for our kids these days to have a place to get out close by home, I think. Everybody should have within 10 or 15 minutes someplace they can go to get into nature and get away from the hustle and bustle of the city and the cars and the noise.
As our cities expand and consume more and more wildlife habitat, perhaps these small urban oases are even more important to the wildlife that live here than they are for the humans who visit.